They said the Iranian Navy was destroyed. But what if that victory was never the real battle? From Washington's podiums, a narrative of total dominance takes shape, precision strikes, shattered fleets, and uncontested control of the sea. But from Tehran, a colder message emerges. Not about ships, but about distance, a line that no one dares to cross. This isn't just a military story, it's a silent shift in how power is projected, where fear moves faster than missiles, and perception starts to outweigh firepower. Markets react, ships hesitate, and a narrow stretch of water begins to dictate global stability. So, if the battlefield isn't the ocean, then where is the real war being fought? And why does a single invisible boundary suddenly feel more dangerous than open conflict? Imagine standing on the steel deck of an asterisk Arleigh Burke, class destroyer *** in the tense waters of the Persian Gulf. Inside the ship, the *** Aegis combat system, *** is fully active radars scanning the horizon, fire control systems ready, and beneath your feet dozens of Tomahawk missiles waiting in vertical launch tubes. In pure military terms, you represent overwhelming naval dominance. And yet, ahead of you lies something strange, an invisible line across the water. No treaty created it, no law of the sea recognizes it. But from Pentagon admirals to sailors on midnight watch, everyone seems to respect it. Cross that line, and the world erupts. Cameras turn on, capitals go on alert. Stay behind it, and you are quietly playing by rules written by your adversary. This is not a battle of ships, missiles, or tonnage. It is a battlefield satellites cannot see, the weaponization of narrative. Recently, Iran's armed forces chief, Amir Hatami, stepped to a podium and delivered a single, carefully crafted line. They say they destroyed the Iranian Navy. Yet it remains strong, and the enemy respects a distance of 300 kilometers. To a casual listener, it sounds like ordinary military bravado, but in the world of modern information warfare, it is something far more dangerous. A psychological operation disguised as a sentence. But in the realm of information warfare, you do not just listen to the words, you dissect them. You strip away the bravado and look at the bare, skeletal anatomy of the claim. You look at the architecture of the deception. You ask yourself, what is the speaker trying to build in the mind of the listener? Let us break down the very first half of that statement. They say they have destroyed the Iranian Navy. Stop right there. Hit pause on the video. Ask yourself a critical, fundamental question. Who exactly is they? When did they say this? Where is the press release? Where is the Pentagon briefing transcript? There is no major intelligence report, no official statement from the United States Department of Defense, and no operational update from the Israeli Defense Forces claiming the complete, catastrophic annihilation of the Iranian Navy. No Western fleet commander has ever stood up at a podium and declared that Iran's naval forces have been wiped from the face of the earth. That missing piece of evidence is your first massive clue. This is not a military situation report. This is a deliberate, highly calculated psychological operation. Hatami is employing a classic, devastatingly effective technique known in narrative warfare as the strawman framing. By inventing an extreme enemy claim that never actually existed, Hatami handed himself the perfect, undefended target to destroy. He built a straw man of total defeat, placed it directly in the minds of his audience, and then dramatically, heroically burned it down in front of a global camera. It is a brilliant cognitive maneuver. Why? Because the human brain processes the denial of a massive threat very differently than it processes the assertion of a simple fact. By explicitly saying they claim we are completely destroyed, Hatami forces his audience, both his domestic supporters and the international media, to mentally visualize that utter destruction. He introduces the concept of total defeat. And then, in the very next breath, he provides the psychological relief. We are still strong and powerful. But why would a seasoned military commander go through the trouble of inventing a lie just to debunk it? Why wage war against a ghost? Because in the theater of modern 21st century conflict, perception is the actual battlefield. For months, if not years, there has been a steady, quiet drumbeat of rumors, intelligence leaks, and commercial satellite imagery suggesting that Iran's conventional naval capabilities were severely degrading. Whether it was due to aging ship hulls, catastrophic and embarrassing accidents at port, the suffocating grip of international supply chain sanctions, or the mounting pressure of covert shadow wars in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, the narrative of a crumbling, rusted, ineffective fleet was gaining dangerous traction. For a state that relies absolutely heavily on the projection of power to maintain its regional hegemony, this narrative of systemic decay is a fatal threat. It is a threat to the state's internal legitimacy, and more importantly, it is a threat to the complex deterrence matrix it relies upon to keep heavily armed, technologically superior adversaries at bay. You cannot deter the United States Navy if everyone believes your ships cannot even leave the harbor. Hatami's speech was designed as a psychological firebreak. He needed to stop the spread of the decay narrative, and he needed to replace it with something bolder, something aggressive. By explicitly stating the extreme fabrication, they claim we are destroyed. He makes any actual, legitimate Western reports of minor damage, operational failures, or rusting ships seem like part of this grand, fabricated Western lie. Think about the psychological inoculation happening here. If the West is lying about destroying the entire Navy, then they must also be lying about the rust. They must be lying about the broken engines. They must be lying about the ineffective radar systems. Hatami essentially throws a blanket of invalidation over every piece of Western intelligence. It is a preemptive strike on the truth. And then, once the audience is primed, he drops the payload. He defines the new reality. He introduces the 300 kilometer zone. The enemy respects a distance of 300 kilometers from this Navy. He did not just pick a random number out of a hat. He did not just use a vague, unquantifiable phrase like they stay far away from us. He quantified the fear. By attaching a specific metric, 300 kilometers, he transformed an abstract concept of military deterrence into a physical, geographical reality in the minds of the Priance listeners. He created an invisible, yet highly specific border on the map of the Middle East. He effectively told the world, if the American aircraft carriers or the Israeli submarines are staying back, it is not because they are following a prudent, calculated tactical doctrine. It is not because they are optimizing their radar horizons. It is not because they are avoiding commercial shipping lanes. It is because they are afraid. They respect us. This is the exact moment where the narrative warfare shifts from a defensive, reactive posture into a highly offensive, dominant stance. Hatami took a standard, routine, tactical maneuver of his adversary and weaponized it against them. Let us step out of the narrative for a second and look at the cold, hard reality of modern naval warfare. Why would a United States carrier strike group stay 300 kilometers off a hostile coastline? Because that is the mathematically sound, strategically sensible thing to do. The U.S. Navy operates multi-billion-dollar strategic assets carrying thousands of American sailors. Pushing a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier too close to a hostile shore places it within the dense, overlapping engagement zones of cheap, easily replaceable shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles, swarm suicide drones, and fast attack craft. It is what military strategists call an A2, AD environment, anti-access area, denial. The United States stays out of that defensive bubble, not out of a moral respect for the Iranian Navy, and certainly not out of a psychological terror of Iranian patrol boats. They stay out of it out of basic operational geometry. There is simply no strategic benefit to putting a massive, high-value target inside the effective range of cheap coastal defense batteries unless it is absolutely necessary to launch a kinetic strike. But here is the brutal truth about information warfare. Truth and geometry do not matter. Framing matters. Optics matter. The story you convince the world to believe is the only truth that has strategic weight. Hatami took this cold, calculating American tactical caution and seamlessly framed it as a mark of psychological submission. He took the U.S. Navy's standard risk management doctrine and rebranded it for a global audience as American cowardice. If a U.S. fleet commander makes the rational decision to hold his strike group 300 kilometers out to ensure the safety of his crew and the operational effectiveness of his fighter jets, Hatami has already pre-framed that decision. The American commander is no longer viewed as a professional soldier making a smart, textbook tactical choice. In the eyes of the public consuming this Iranian narrative, that commander is a man bowing his head. He is a man showing respect to the overwhelming, terrifying might of the Iranian shadow. The absolute terrifying brilliance of this cognitive operation is that it creates a paralyzing trap for the adversary. It is a strategic catch. Constructed entirely out of words. Think deeply about the position this puts the Pentagon in. Washington hears this statement translated. The intelligence analysts brief the admirals. How does the world's most powerful military react to a weaponized rumor? If the United States ignores the statement entirely, maintains its current, sensible operational protocols, and keeps its ships 300 kilometers away as planned, they silently, inadvertently validate the Iranian propaganda. The public in Tehran, the militia commanders in Baghdad, and the proxy fighters in Yemen look at their tracking maps, see the American ships staying back, and say, Hatami was right. Look at them. The Americans are terrified. They are staying exactly where we told them to stay. By doing nothing, the United States allows Iran to win a massive narrative, battle without firing a single shot, without burning a single liter of jet fuel. On the other hand, what if the United States decides they simply cannot let this blatant propaganda stand? What if an admiral in the Pentagon or a politician in Washington decides they need to call the bluff? They order a guided missile, destroyer, or an entire carrier strike group to deliberately pierce that 300-kilometer veil just to prove a point on television. They sail right up to the 100-kilometer mark just to demonstrate freedom of navigation and shatter Hatami's narrative. If they do that, they are willingly stepping into a highly volatile, geographically disadvantaged kill zone. They are risking a tactical confrontation, a catastrophic miscalculation, or a swarm attack, which is exactly what the U.S. Strategic Command wants to avoid. Furthermore, the Iranian media apparatus is perfectly primed for this scenario. 2. If the U.S. sails close, Iran will immediately activate its radar locks. They will scramble their fast attack boats. They will flood the maritime radio frequencies with aggressive warnings. Even if not a single shot is fired by either side, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps will film the entire encounter from multiple angles. They will edit the footage with dramatic music and broadcast it to the world with the blazing headline, Heroic Iranian Naval Forces Intercept, Humiliate, and Chase Away Intruding American Fleet. It is a lose-lose scenario for the United States. Either way, Iran wins the cognitive engagement. They have successfully trapped the world's most powerful, technologically supreme navy in a rhetorical box. The decision makers in Washington and Tel Aviv are now facing a subtle, yet immensely powerful cognitive constraint. Every single movement of their naval assets in that region is no longer just a military maneuver. It is a media event. It is being interpreted, judged, and broadcast through the lens of, this is not just about keeping ships safe from shore-based missiles anymore. It is about avoiding the optics of being defeated without a fight. It is about the exhausting daily management of the perception of global power. When high-level military analysts and think tank scholars talk about strategic communication, this is exactly the kind of battlefield they are referring to. It is not about a team of fact-checkers writing a polite correction on a website. It is about who holds the power to define what a standard naval patrol actually represents. By injecting the highly emotive, culturally loaded word respect into a sterile, mathematical, tactical range, Hatami has successfully branded the waters of the Middle East. He has turned it into a space where the rules of engagement are dictated by the person who controls the story, not the person who controls the sea. Now, to truly understand the scale of this operation, let us examine the target audiences. A psychological weapon is only as powerful as the minds it infects. Hatami was not speaking into a void. He was aiming at 3 very distinct, very critical demographic targets. First, consider the domestic audience inside the borders of Iran. This is a population that has been subjected to years of crushing, systemic economic sanctions. They face political isolation, crippling inflation, and periodic internal unrest. The citizens are bombarded daily with the reality of their currency collapsing and their civil infrastructure straining under pressure. For a government in this precarious position, projecting an aura of absolute, unshakable invincibility is not a matter of pride, it is a matter of regime, survival. The average citizen watching state television is not logging onto Western military defense blogs to check the maximum effective range of an Iranian anti-ship ballistic missile. They are not calculating the curvature of the Earth to understand the radar horizon of an American Aegis cruiser. They are sitting in their living rooms, turning on the news, and hearing the highest-ranking military officer in their country confidently, calmly declare that the great American empire is literally too scared to bring its ships within 300 kilometers of their shores. That is a massive, intoxicating injection of nationalistic pride. It acts as a psychological shield for the government. It sends a clear, subliminal message to the population. No matter how bad the economy gets, no matter how much you struggle at home, we are still the undisputed masters of the Gulf. We are the ones the Americans fear. It effectively converts a population that might be deeply questioning the competence of their economic ministers into a population that feels protected by a formidable, untouchable military apparatus. It buys the regime time, patience, and loyalty. Next, look beyond Iran's borders to their regional proxy network, the axis of resistance. Hezbollah in the mountains of Lebanon, the Houthis controlling the coast of Yemen, the various heavily armed militia groups operating in Iraq and Syria. These proxy groups are the forward-operating kinetic arms of Iranian foreign policy, but they operate in dangerous, austere environments. Their morale, their willingness to fight, and their willingness to absorb heavy casualties are directly tied to their perception of the mothership in Tehran. If the proxies believe Iran is weak, isolated, or crumbling, their resolve shatters. Hatami's statement is a direct, encrypted morale broadcast to these proxy fighters. It is a psychological signal flare that says, do not fear the American aircraft carriers. Do not fear their fighter jets. We have them contained. We have drawn a line in the water, and they are obeying it like subordinates. This narrative becomes ideological fuel on the ground. When a Houthi rebel commander makes the decision to fire an anti-ship missile into a commercial shipping lane in the Red Sea, he is emboldened by the foundational belief that the overarching Western enemy is fundamentally cowardly and easily deterred. The 300-kilometer narrative acts as a massive force multiplier for every proxy fighter from Beirut to Sana'a. It creates a unified regional perception of Western weakness and Iranian supremacy. Finally, consider the third target audience, the adversary itself. We have already discussed the tactical catch, 2-2 set for the Pentagon, but there is a much deeper psychological layer meant to disrupt the Western command structure. Narrative warfare is designed to induce decision paralysis. When an adversarial command structure knows that every single action they take will be immediately framed, twisted, and weaponized against them in the global media space, they become hesitant. They begin to second-guess their routine deployments. The military objective becomes polluted by public relations anxieties. If a United States fleet commander wants to move a ship simply to conduct routine engine maintenance or rotate a crew, he now has to sit in a briefing room and worry about an Iranian press release claiming that his ship is fleeing the 300-kilometer zone in terror. This forces the Pentagon to waste precious time, intellectual resources, and cognitive energy constantly managing global optics rather than purely focusing on military lethality and readiness. Hatami has successfully forced the United States Navy to fight a war of press, releases, telegram posts, and social media clips. This is a theater of war where the United States is notoriously slow, legally constrained, and bureaucratically hindered. By contrast, the Iranian propaganda machine is fast, agile, highly aggressive, and completely unburdened by the need to tell the objective truth. Let us track the life cycle of this weaponized claim. Let us watch how it mutates once it leaves the podium. Because in the modern, hyper-connected information ecosystem, a quote like this does not just stay as text in a local newspaper. It is a digital virus. Within minutes of Hatami speaking the words, the quote is translated by state media agencies. It hits the thousands of encrypted telegram channels affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. In these channels, the sterile quote is paired with dramatic, slow-motion, highly edited footage of Iranian fast attack boats swarming through the Gulf, overlaid with heavy, aggressive, pulse-pounding music. The 300-kilometer claim is condensed. It is turned into a hashtag. It is transformed from a military statement into a meme of anti-Western resistance. It floods social media platforms across the Middle East. Then, it crosses the language barrier and enters the Western media ecosystem. And this is where the absolute genius of the strawman framing truly shines. And where the West becomes unwittingly complicit in its own cognitive defeat. Western news outlets, attempting to be objective and report on global events, will invariably run a headline that looks something like this: Iran military Chief claims U.S. Navy respects 300 kilometers. Distance. Denies fleet is destroyed. Even when Western defense analysts go on primetime television to fact-check the claim, even when news networks bring on retired, decorated admirals with maps to carefully explain that the U.S. Navy stays back because of tactical, anti-access, area denial doctrine, and not out of fear they are falling right into the trap. Why? Because they are still repeating the premise. They are still saying the words 300 kilometers to millions of viewers. They are still engaging directly with the fictional framework that Hatami built from scratch. By attempting to logically, rationally debunk a psychological operation, the West inadvertently amplifies it. They provide massive amounts of oxygen to the straw man. They legitimize the 300 kilometer parameter simply by dedicating airtime to debate it. To the average viewer who only reads the headline or listens with half an ear, the takeaway is not the tactical explanation of the retired admiral. The takeaway is simply that Iran drew a line and the US is talking about it. This is the dark, intricate art of cognitive warfare. You do not need to convince the enemy that you are telling the absolute truth. You only need to force the enemy to spend all of their time, energy, and media space reacting to your version of reality. But we cannot stop our analysis at the present moment. We must look at the horizon. What are the future scenarios? Where does this specific narrative battle go from here? Because cognitive warfare is not static. It constantly escalates. Let us project the vectors of this psychological conflict. Scenario 1 is what intelligence analysts might call the silent consensus. In this scenario, the physical reality of the water remains completely unchanged over the next few years. The United States and its allies continue to operate their carriers and strike groups strictly outside the 300 kilometer mark, purely for logical, tactical, and safety reasons. Meanwhile, Iran continues to aggressively, relentlessly claim this positioning as a psychological and military victory. Over time, through sheer, unyielding repetition, the 300 kilometer line stops, being a contested propaganda claim, and becomes an accepted, unspoken rule of the region. It solidifies in the geopolitical consciousness. It transitions from a media strategy into a recognized buffer zone. In this scenario, Iran successfully establishes a massive, protective maritime perimeter without having to design, build, or deploy a single extra warship. They win the territory by default, simply because the adversary chose not to engage in the exhausting narrative fight. Scenario 2 is the visual counteroffensive. The intelligence apparatus of the West finally realizes the immense compounding danger of this growing cognitive perimeter. They understand that they cannot fight a viral, emotional narrative with a dry, factual Pentagon press briefing. They realize they need to aggressively shatter the mental image Iran has built. In this scenario, Western or Israeli intelligence agencies begin a coordinated campaign of strategically leaking high-resolution satellite imagery, classified drone footage, and intercepted communications. They release undeniable, high-definition visual proof of Iranian warships severely rusting in port, submarines failing to safely dive, or fast attack boats breaking down and requiring a tow in the open water. They bypass the tedious 300 kilometer tactical argument entirely and attack the very core premise of Hatami's statement, the idea that the Iranian Navy is strong and powerful. They use raw, undeniable, embarrassing visual facts to break the spell of the claim. This aggressive countermove forces the Iranian media apparatus onto the defensive, scrambling to explain away the visual evidence, claiming it is doctored or fake, effectively stripping them of their dominant, offensive narrative posture. But there is a third scenario, and it is by far the most dangerous. Scenario 3 is the fatal miscalculation of belief. This phenomenon occurs when a regime's propaganda machine is so overwhelmingly effective, so ubiquitous, that the regime itself begins to consume and believe its own manufactured reality. Hatami originally created this 300 kilometer zone as a calculated psychological tool. It was a bluff designed to manage optics. But what happens over time? What happens when the younger, highly radicalized commanders in the Iranian military, the ones who grew up consuming this exact propaganda, rise to positions of tactical power? In the 21st century, the distance between rival powers is no longer measured in kilometers at sea, but in who controls the narrative inside people's minds. So when you hear bold military claims in the news, do not just listen to the words, look for the structure behind them. Ask what story is being built, what invisible lines are being drawn, and who benefits if the world believes them. Because the moment you start accepting that narrative, wondering whether a superpower is afraid to cross an imaginary line, you have already surrendered ground in the cognitive battlefield. The ships, missiles, and oceans remain exactly the same. But the perception of power has been rewritten, and that is the real weapon of modern conflict. You do not need to destroy the enemy's fleet. You only need to convince the world that the fleet is too afraid to move.